The Quiet Architect, a corporate revenge chronicle, Anile. The rattle in the woods, the first signs. Stred. Ma'am, we need your eyes on this like right now. I hadn't even had my second cup of coffee yet, and already the junior legal associate was practically vibrating at my office door like a chihuahua on espresso. I didn't roll my eyes, but God, I wanted to. My name is Anya Sharma, and for 8 years at Sterling Global, I had been the invisible scaffolding, the senior strategist technically, but mostly the fixer, the one who quietly played chess with a board full of jackals. I took the printout from his trembling hand and gave it a once-over. Top corner, confidential memo center, preliminary asset divestiture timeline. Bottom line, someone had accidentally BCC'd the entire M&A partner list on a highly sensitive document. If even one of them forwarded this to the wrong inbox, we'd be dealing with a press leak before lunch, turning a smooth acquisition into a hostile PR nightmare. Tell Susan to recall the email, I instructed calmly. Scrub the servers, internal and external, then get me the full recipient list and pull audit logs on who opened it. I want to know if any of those files pinged a non-comp. Said it the way you tell someone how to make a decent grilled cheese, because that's what I did. Cleaned up disasters before they made it to the top floor. I covered for their screw-ups, wrote the playbooks they never read, and made very, very bad problems go quietly away. This was a Tuesday. By 9:30 a.m., I had already neutralized the leak, updated the kill switch protocol on external drives tied to the memo, and sent the internal comms team a revised routine testing email story to patch over the panic. Half the board hadn't even noticed. The CFO called me a miracle in heels, which is rich, considering the man once tried to expense a luxury safari trip as a leadership off-site. Crisis handled. I returned to my office, set down my now cold coffee, and finally opened my calendar. It's when I noticed the first crack in the glass. My weekly one-on-one with the CEO, Victor Sterling, blocked out for the last 364 Mondays, was gone. Not rescheduled, just deleted. No cancellation email, no note, and the invite for Thursday's pipeline alignment meeting had been updated. I wasn't on it. The system didn't say declined, my name had been stripped out entirely, like I'd never existed. That's when I checked my system access log. The back-end console, the doc libraries, the review queues I was the admin for was still there, but something was off. My edit privileges had been silently downgraded on 3 key folders containing the original merger agreements and the equity trust documentation. Someone had pulled access while I was scrubbing their mess. I didn't panic, not my style, but I did get still, really still. Like when you hear a faint rattle in the woods and you don't know if it's a snake or a broken sprinkler head. I've been in the game long enough to smell a setup 2 weeks before it hits payroll. I don't mean one of those dramatic stunts with HR marching someone out under fluorescent lights while Janet from accounts films it for TikTok. I mean the real kind. The soft betrayal, the whispered restructuring, the kind of visionary pivot that starts with the CEO's son-in-law getting a corner office and ends with you finding your badge deactivated on a Monday morning. If you're still reading, I'll just say this. Most people assume they'd see it coming. They don't. You don't. Hell, I almost didn't, and I wrote the contingency clauses myself. Proliferation. Arming the payload. Deflate. I left the office early that day, unusual for me. No one commented, but a few people looked up when I walked past. Those slow, polite blinks, like they were waiting for someone else to say something first. My phone buzzed as I stepped into the elevator. It was a calendar removal alert, one of my recurring system monitors pinging that a high-level permissions token had been revoked. The source? Internal systems admin level. That's when I knew they were actively cleaning house, and I was the one with the mop until I wasn't. Still, I didn't react. I drove home, fed my cat, poured a glass of wine, and opened the encrypted archive I hadn't touched since the merger 6 years ago. The one with the original buyout documents, the contingency plans, and the dusty old LLC agreements we'd shelved and forgotten. I opened a file folder titled Trigger Events, Clause 14.6. The name stared back at me like a snake blinking in the dark, and I smiled. Threatened, the next morning the ritual execution was waiting. Ethan Pierce, Victor Sterling's ambitious son-in-law and the newly appointed Chief Strategy Officer, was waiting in the HR glass box like he owned the oxygen inside it. Buttoned up just tight enough to hide the boys still flinching underneath, he gave me that oily, rehearsed smile I'd seen in every VC pitch deck photo. The kind of smile that says, "I watched one video on leadership, and now I think I'm Churchill." HR's director, Sandra, perched across from him, already sweating through her peach-coloured blouse, fingers fidgeting with a copy of the employee handbook she'd clearly never read. I stepped in and closed the door gently behind me. "And thank you for joining us," Ethan started, his voice artificially smooth, like someone had coached him through this. "We'll make this brief." Incarcerated, I didn't sit. I just looked at him like I was inspecting drywall for mold. He continued anyway. "After a strategic review of our operational structure, we've decided your position has been dissolved, effective immediately." Sandra chimed in, equally rehearsed. "Retroactively, actually. The paperwork was finalized yesterday. You'll find the details in this packet." I said, not a question, just oxygen turned into words. "Yes," Ethan said, a little too fast, "as part of a broader alignment. It's not personal." "Of course not," I replied, flat as a parking lot. Sandra slid a manila envelope across the table. "Your severance is outlined here. We've deactivated your badge and laptop access for security reasons. They are packaging up your desk now, and we'd like to walk you out discreetly in the next 15 minutes. Like I was a ghost, and they were doing me the favor of letting me haunt the lobby one last time. Ethan cleared his throat, clearly expecting me to protest, to beg, to display some form of emotional distress that would validate his superior position. "You understand this may come as a surprise, but—" "I'll sign," I said, pulling a pen from my blazer pocket. Sandra blinked. "Oh, we have pens." "I'll use mine." I sat, uncapped the fountain pen slowly, blue ink, pressure sensitive, and signed the acknowledgement page. Not the NDA, not the non-compete, just the page that said I'd been told. It was the pen that mattered. 3 years ago, I'd worked with legal to embed a signature verification framework tied to high-level exits for security reasons, fraud mostly, to prevent impersonations during hostile buyouts. The ink and pressure profile of that specific fountain pen was tied to the archive, time-stamped, immutable, just a little gift to future me. I recapped the pen, slid it back in my pocket and stood. Ethan looked surprised, disappointed even, like he thought I'd make a scene. But I wasn't going to scream, I wasn't going to beg, I wasn't even going to blink. That would have made it personal. I picked up the envelope and walked toward the door. Sandra half rose, unsure if she was supposed to escort me. I spared her the dignity. "Thanks," I said, voice dry as copy paper. "Tell security not to bother. I know the way out." As I passed the reception desk, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. Calm, poised. One hair out of place on the right. I fixed it. Outside, the sun hit hard, unforgiving and hot. The kind of heat that makes concrete radiate and men in ties sweat guilt. I didn't break stride. I got in my car, shut the door, turned the AC to Arctic, and stared at the envelope in my lap. Strategic realignment, the paper inside still warm from the printer. They didn't even give me the courtesy of delay. They planned this for weeks, maybe longer. Ethan had probably spent the last few nights practicing that speech in the mirror, imagining how cool he'd look firing the legacy hire, the fixer, the woman who knew where the bodies were buried because she dug the damn holes. I opened my private phone. Calendar access gone, email locked, internal Slack deactivated, but my private archive, still live, still mine. I typed one word into the search bar. Trigger. Up came exactly what I'd hoped, a memo titled Redemption Trigger DNC 14, dated 6 years ago, countersigned by Victor Sterling himself, and attached to a dormant severance clause. Clause 14.6.c. The moment I saw the activation criteria, my heart didn't race. It slowed. Involuntary termination of employee linked to executive familial restructuring shall trigger full buyout rights under LLC Agreement 6A, provided termination is initiated retroactively and verified by timestamp signature. My calm, my stillness, not weakness, not denial, preparation. Because the only person who could have built that clause was me, and they had just walked directly into it. The retrieval, a warehouse of corporate ghosts. The storage unit smelled like forgotten ambition, cardboard, old ink, and the lingering disappointment of projects that never launched. I hadn't been back in years, not since the second merger, when they moved legal off-site and digitized everything except what they didn't want indexed. My unit was sandwiched between a bankrupt catering company and someone's failed Etsy warehouse. Unit 209, a 10 by 10 space full of corporate ghosts. I keyed in the passcode, my first boss's birthday, and the door groaned open like it knew something had changed. Against the back wall sat the filing cabinet I'd lugged in myself, behind a broken ergonomic chair and a crate labeled Q3 Crisis Playbooks. I moved the chair, crouched, and popped the bottom drawer. Inside, behind a weather-warped binder and 2 spare burner phones, was what I needed. A dusty metal lockbox, combination only. Submerged A, slim. 22, right 14, left 6. It clicked. Compiled under a single hand-labeled folder. Trigger events. Not in case of emergency. Not if something goes wrong. No, these were the break glass if they screw you papers. Not for panic, for precision. I flipped through them slowly. Clause 9, contractual immunity during executive misconduct cleanups, expired. Clause 12, reinstatement rights if fired during acquisition, only valid if I still held shares. I didn't. Imprisoned. Clause 14.6.c. I paused. The paper was heavier than the others. Original copy, initialed, signed, stamped, dated 6 years ago during the peak paranoia phase, when Victor Sterling was convinced the board would stage a coup and Ethan was still introducing himself as serially adjacent to success. It read, in the event of a retroactive involuntary termination initiated by an executive with familial ties to active leadership, the named employee shall assume full rights to equity redistribution per subsection 6A, provided the event meets authentication protocol outlined in Addendum B. I flipped to Addendum B. Authentication required 3 things. 1. Termination must be retroactive. Devon said the paperwork was signed yesterday. Trigger must be a leadership change involving family. Devon, CEO's son-in-law. 3. The clause must be manually activated by a time-stamped, notarized copy of the original agreement. That's why I brought my pen to HR. I sat on the floor, the file in my lap, hands steady. They'd handed me all 3 requirements on a silver platter. I pulled out my private phone and made one call. Hello, Mr. Al. Yes, this is Anya Sharma. I need a notary. No, not a digital one. I need physical signature verification of an original document. I need the timestamp logged by end of day. I'll pay double your rush fee. He asked where to meet. I said, my kitchen table. I hung up. Then I took a breath, leaned back against the cold wall of the unit, and let the silence wrap around me like armor. This wasn't about revenge or ego or even the job. That bridge was already burnt and scattered to ash. This was about what I built. You don't spend 8 years fixing everything broken in a company, cleaning up the messes of men who think NDAs are magic shields, without learning how to protect yourself too. You don't sign agreements without building in doors they'll never notice, because they never read the fine print. They just assume you'll stay quiet. They forget who wrote the clauses. I packed the folder into a fireproof bag, locked the box again, and shoved the drawer shut. By the time I turned onto my street, the notary had already texted his ETA. I poured a glass of water, set the document on the table, and straightened the corners. The next board meeting was scheduled for Friday. If they stuck to habit, Devon would grandstand, Victor would bluff and smirk, and legal would stay quiet, waiting for the mess to drip down the walls before they got involved. They'd think the fallout was still weeks away. But the moment this document hit their inbox with a verified timestamp and compliance signature, it was over. The clause gave me full controlling interest in the trust that owned the equity pool, contingent on one thing: being fired by Devon Pierce. I didn't need a raise, I didn't need applause, I needed them to underestimate me, which, lucky for me, they had repeatedly. Blow, annihilate, timing the operated out of a brick office behind a dry cleaner and a vape shop, with a receptionist who never once looked up from her Sudoku. He was the kind of attorney who wore loafers without socks, not because he was stylish, but because he liked to remind you he hadn't run out of middle fingers since the 90s. I liked him because he never asked why, just how soon. Need you to verify one signature, I told him, sliding the file across his desk. Dated March 12, 6 years ago. Original ink, initialed per section 14, witnessed per addendum B. He flipped through the pages, raised one brow. This what I think it is? Unrestricted, I lied smoothly, just confirming a dormant agreement for audit prep. He nodded once and opened a drawer with a heavy-duty stamp kit. You want timestamp logging? Yes, multiple redundancies, 1 digital, 2 physical. I'll scan and handle encryption later. Anything else? I was never here. Foreground. You always say that, and yet here you are, not in prison, he replied. He gave the file 2 stamps, scribbled a note in his ledger, then slid it back without another word. I took it, thanked him, and left through the side door. By the time I got home, the documents were still warm from the notary's scanner bed. I lined them up on my desk, the notarized signature page, the full 14.6.c clause, and the 6-year-old internal memo that had been buried under risk planning so long ago, even it forgot it existed. Title: Redemption Trigger DNC 14. Norwich explicitly named the LLC agreement tied to our core equity trust. It outlined emergency activation conditions. It referenced the buyout mechanism. Most importantly, it bore Victor Sterling's digital signature, verified, archived, time-locked. They'd all signed off on it during the merger hysteria, when everyone was more worried about IPO headlines than the fine print in contingency clauses. I compressed everything into an encrypted bundle, used a salted hash key I'd created years ago, and scheduled the delivery through an old enterprise-grade auto-trigger tool I'd once configured for crisis communications. One of my many invisible systems. Timestamp: Friday, 1 p.m., mid-board meeting. I even routed the email through our internal legal queue, so it would show up on the main screen when they shared updates. No one would miss it. No one would be able to stop it either. With that done, I shut my laptop and poured a second cup of coffee. The next morning, I got the first alert. Devon, brilliant tactician that he was, had sent out an internal announcement. Subject line: Operational Vision Refresh, Q3 and beyond. I wasn't CC'd. The email talked about restructuring, flattening verticals, cross-collaboration, all the usual bingo card garbage. But there, 3 paragraphs down, was the part that made me blink twice. Effective immediately, all legacy strategy roles will be reviewed for alignment against updated KPIs. Transition plans will begin next week. Legacy strategy roles. That instead, I was now something else entirely, something Devon hadn't planned for, something the CEO hadn't even realized was walking back toward them. I stayed silent. I didn't text anyone, didn't log into Slack. I wanted no trace of forward motion, no signals, just dead air. Because the quiet ones, we don't argue in all-hands meetings. We don't fume in LinkedIn posts. We build devices. We hide switches. And when the time is right, we pull them. Midday, I drove to the bank to update my trust details. Not the one they knew about, the other one. The one tied to the LLC referenced in Clause 14.6c. Faxed over the notarized documents, received confirmation in 37 minutes. By the time the sun dipped, everything was ready. Trigger clause armed. Routing logic verified. Legal MDA flawless. They had no idea that the last person they'd fired wasn't a redundant strategist. She was the only one with the ignition codes. The boardroom takedown, 1 p.m. Friday. Depiction: I parked exactly where I always did, level 3, far back left, next to the concrete pillar that smelled like mildew and indifference. Same cracked windshield. Same hanging air freshener, now a faded grey. Everything looked the same, except I wasn't. I stepped out of the car, heels clicking like war drums against the parking deck. Power walk, not fast, not slow, just confident, calculated. My blouse was starched, blazer pressed, hair twisted into the kind of bun that said, "Don't bother." In my bag, nothing but the bare essentials. My phone, my pen, and a silent payload ticking down behind a firewall they never thought to check. I took the elevator to the lobby. A young guy in a too-tight suit looked up from the security desk. His face twitched when he saw me, something between confusion and fear. "Miss Sharma," he said, half rising, "we thought, I'm here for the board meeting," I said, not slowing. "Room 17B, as always." He glanced at his monitor, then back at me. His hand hovered near his walkie. I stopped, locked eyes with him, and raised my badge. Beep. The gate clicked open. He didn't say another word. I walked past reception, through the hall, past the corporate art they installed to make the building feel inspired. It was still sterile, still overlit, still pulsing with people who measured worth by Slack emojis and calendar invites. I knew half of them saw me. I also knew none of them would stop me. I was a ghost now. Ghosts walk where they please. Room 17B had already filled. The board flanked the long glass table. Devon stood near the projection screen, shuffling his notes like a kid prepping for show and tell. Victor Sterling, the CEO, wasn't present yet. Typical. Legal counsel was seated near the far end, whispering to his associate, expression locked in that default setting of preemptive regret. I opened the door like I owned the hinges and stepped inside. Devon froze mid-sentence. He saw me, he blinked, and then he did something brilliant. He smiled. "Anya," he chirped, voice an octave too high. "Weren't expecting you today." I smiled back. "That's funny, I'm still on the board invite list. Room 17B, 1 p.m., you remember? His eyes twitched just a little, but his mouth kept up the act. Of course, of course. We must have missed something in the calendar update. Hello? Heels executed louder than I expected. I slid into my usual chair, second seat from the left, across from the CFO. No one said a word. The silence was sharp. Legal's associate looked like he was about to whisper something, but decided to let the silence do the talking. Devon cleared his throat. Well, we've got a lot to cover, so let's jump right in. He tapped his laptop. The projector buzzed to life. Slide 1. Q3 Reorg Strategy Draft Outline. Unnamed. I didn't look at the screen. I looked at my watch. 12:58 p.m. Devon rambled about flattening structures and operational synergies, the usual verbal beige paint. He skipped past anything that sounded too technical. 12:59 p.m. My watch vibrated. Not loud, not dramatic, just a small pulse on my wrist. Timer I'd set in my phone earlier. 1 minute until the scheduled transmission. 1 minute until the quietest missile ever launched would land directly in this room. The legal associate shifted again, whispered something to counsel. Counsel leaned forward, squinting at something on his tablet. Another pulse on my wrist. I kept my face neutral, legs crossed, hands folded. No expression, no gloating, just waiting. Devon was on slide 6 now, something about streamlined reporting. He didn't notice the subtle flicker in the room. Legal's posture stiffening, 2 board members exchanging sideways glances. They could feel it, not consciously, but something had changed. Like that moment before a storm hits, when the pressure drops and everything gets too quiet. I leaned back slightly in my chair, letting them squirm, because the email was already in motion. Routing through the internal legal queue labeled Urgent DNC 14 Activation Packet, timestamped, verified, immutable, exactly as I planned. Let Devon keep talking. He had 45 seconds of oxygen left before the room caught fire. Legal's tablet dinged with the subtle chime only corporate software can make, bland, clinical, and terminally polite, like death by elevator music. Counsel didn't react at first, just glanced down as Devon droned on about some fake efficiency pod structure no one in the room believed for a second. Then he froze. The associate next to him leaned in, read the preview line, and straightened like he'd just sat on a cattle prod. I didn't move. The email subject line glowed softly from across the table. Urgent. DNC 14 Activation Packet. Sealed. Legal trigger. It had landed. Unstoppable. Excuse me, counsel said, cutting Devon off mid-sentence for the first time in any meeting I'd ever seen. Devon blinked. Sure, something wrong? Counsel didn't answer him. Attachment. On the conference screen behind Devon, the sealed PDF opened automatically, full screen. Header. Ed Equity Redistribution Protocol, Clause 14.6.c. Subheader. Activated. Involuntary termination event verified. The room went so quiet you could hear the HVAC system struggling to keep up with the rising tension. Victor Sterling slid into his seat like he could physically lean his way out of what was coming. The first page of the packet showed my name, full legal and company ID. Below it, the clause text. Then came the trigger line. In the event that Anya Sharma is involuntarily terminated under circumstances involving executive familial restructuring, this clause shall be considered activated as of termination timestamp. Authority to redistribute equity, transfer trust assets, and assume controlling interest shall proceed per subsection 6A, non-reversible upon verified execution. Then the signature page, dated 6 years ago. My signature in blue ink right where I left it, initialed by Victor Sterling, verified by external counsel, witnessed by notary. all with timestamp metadata embedded and visibly certified. No edits, no loopholes, no delays, just the hammer dropping. Devon stammered, That can't be right. What is this? This isn't… Counsel didn't answer. He was scanning page 2, then page 3. Then he muttered, almost involuntarily, It's real. Freeze's Victor Sterling leaned forward, palms flat on the table. Turn that off right now. Clang doesn't move. The associate whispered, It's in the system. Q, legal locked. Can't stop it now. Another page loaded. The scan memo. Redemption trigger DNC 14. It referenced the clause, the conditions, the attached LLC agreement they forgot they'd ever signed. Victor Sterling's digital signature sat on the bottom right corner of that memo, like a landmine finally going off. Jesus Christ, the CFO breathed, slumping in his seat. Cred Devon looked at me like I'd grown horns, pale, sweaty, like he finally understood what had just happened. You set this up? I tilted my head slightly. I didn't set anything up. You activated it. I just prepared it. Why would you? You fired me, Devon, I said calmly, keeping my voice even. Retroactively, as part of a familial leadership restructure. I didn't write the clause after you did that. You just walked right into it. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Across the room, legal counsel closed his tablet slowly, like he was afraid any sudden movement might trigger another document to appear. Victor Sterling slammed a hand on the table. We never approved this. Counsel didn't even look up. Sir, you signed it. March 12th, 6 years ago. I can pull the version history right now. But this clause, this was never meant to be… Unrestricted. Then maybe you should have read the documents you approved, I said, still calmly, almost gently. Victor Sterling stared at me like he wanted to say something else, but words failed him. His face twitched, a small involuntary tick under his left eye, the kind of thing that happens when someone realizes their whole kingdom was built on someone else's blueprint. Because now the room knew this wasn't a prank, it wasn't a stunt, it was legal, executed, irrevocable. Devon sank into his chair like the gravity in the room had doubled. Nobody spoke. I didn't need to. The clause had done the talking for me. Irrevocable, the final word. Submerged. Read it again, Victor Thorne barked, sweat beading on his brow. His tie was yanked halfway loose, eyes locked on legal like he could stare the clause into reversing itself. General Counsel cleared his throat, pulled the printed copy from the packet displayed on the screen, and began, voice dry as toast and twice as bitter. Clause 14.6.c. In the event that Anya Sharma is subject to an involuntary termination, retroactive or otherwise, initiated by an individual with familial ties to the executive leadership team, and that said termination is associated with any operational restructuring or reorganization which affects previously assigned strategic duties, this clause shall activate automatically and irrevocably. Upon activation, controlling interest in the designated LLC Equity Trust, reference 6A, shall transfer to the named employee in accordance with Addendum B, which confirms binding notarization and timestamped execution. At the word irrevocably, the room went still again. You could feel it hit the table like a gun with no safety. Devon's chair let out a squeak, neck blotches absurd. This as Justin wanted meant to be live. We all signed 100 of these things during the merger blitz. None of them were real, just filler. Counsel didn't even look up. Its notarization is on file, external, state-registered, certified. There's a copy in the Delaware archives, digital and physical, referencing the memo. The so-called DNC whatever, Victor spat. Counsel nodded grimly. DNC 14 redemption trigger. It's also signed by you, sir, twice. I never read that damn memo. A beat passed. Then counsel said, in the softest, most legal way possible, "That does not invalidate it, sir." From the far side of the room, the board chair, a woman who had said nothing until now, slowly leaned forward and murmured, "Devon, that email you sent about the Q3 realignment." He blinked, confused. "What about it?" "The wording. You included strategic role reviews, correct?" "Yeah, but..." "You referenced alignment against updated KPIs, transition planning, and if I recall, legacy roles no longer matching the operational vision. That was the phrase." He opened his mouth, closed it, swallowed. "Yes," he said finally. "Why?" Her tone was gentle, surgical. "Because it's Exhibit A now." Devon looked like he'd been hit in the sternum. General Counsel continued, flipping to the printed email stapled to the back of the clause packet. "Mr. Pierce's message directly references restructuring. Its timestamp is before Ms. Sharma was notified of her retroactive termination. The clause activates based on that trigger, which means..." The associate chimed in, nervous but precise. "You fired her in a way that fulfilled every single activation condition she herself drafted 6 years ago." Victor Sterling looked like he might actually stand up and rip the projector off the wall. Instead, he said, "Has to be a way to walk this back, freeze the equity, file a challenge, something." Declared to the final page. "There's a provision here. Any attempt to challenge activation shall result in automatic transfer of administrative control to the named party, pending final arbitration. However, arbitration may only be initiated before termination occurs." A pause. "You missed the window." I remained silent. My presence was louder than any rebuttal. Devon opened his mouth again, closed it, reached for his water glass, missed the coaster and fumbled slightly. The ice clinked. Victor finally sat down hard, hands clasped like prayer, elbows pressed to the polished wood as if trying to summon divine reversal through sheer boardroom posture. Nobody spoke for a long time. They didn't need to. The room was unraveling, not because I raised my voice or stormed in with threats, but because the paper trail had finally caught up. Every clause, every signature, every single oversight that came from assuming I was just a legacy asset, quietly fading into obsolescence. The clause didn't just exist, it won. And now all they could do was scramble through pages trying to find an escape hatch I'd welded shut 6 years ago. Digital Wildfire, the final cascade. At 1:07 p.m., while legal was still rifling through printouts like they were looking for a reset button that didn't exist, the CFO's phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again. Then his tablet lit up, vibrating softly across the boardroom table. Then his laptop, then the board chair's phone, then Devon's. One after another, a cascade of quiet little alarms, barely noticeable beneath the tension in the air, but growing, spreading like digital wildfire. The CFO finally picked up his tablet and stared at the alert. The blood drained from his face. "What?" Victor barked, voice raw, still lodged somewhere between fury and disbelief. Flooring, the CFO didn't answer right away. He tapped, scrolled, then exhaled through his nose like a man watching his own funeral slideshow. "It's a routing update," he muttered. "From where?" counsel demanded. "Equity admin portal, finance. It's the executive pool, just re-indexed. Ownership control system flagged a clause execution protocol, routed the override. The transfer is complete." The air pressure in the room seemed to drop again, more violently this time. The CFO looked up, directly at Victor Sterling, his face a mask of horrified realization. "Sir, the system just moved the controlling interest, the majority stake in the equity trust. It moved it to the account referenced in Addendum B. It's Ms. Sharma's trust." The silence that followed wasn't merely the absence of sound. It was the sound of a company's foundation cracking. Devon lunged halfway across the table, his face mottled red. "No, you can't. We'll sue the trust. We'll freeze the assets. It's an illegal, hostile takeover." I finally spoke, my voice calm, precise, and carrying the full weight of the executed clause. "The transfer is immutable, Devon. You certified it yesterday with your retroactive termination and your strategic realignment memo. The clause was triggered. The system, which I set up years ago to prevent hostile takeovers and fraud, verified the execution based on my time-stamped signature and your father's original authorization. You cannot sue the trust because the trust simply followed the rules that the CEO himself signed and ratified. You didn't just fire me, Devon. You executed the final buyout of the Sterling family's majority interest." Victor Sterling stared at me, his eyes now devoid of the usual bluster, replaced by cold, desperate fear. He finally saw me, not as the miracle in heels or the legacy hire, but as the mastermind who had been waiting patiently for 8 years for them to make this exact, fatal mistake. "You knew," he breathed, the realization a physical punch to his gut. "You knew when you signed the papers yesterday. You engineered your own firing." "I merely prepared for the worst-case scenario," I corrected gently. "I designed a firewall to protect the company from the board, Victor. You just happened to walk through it. My job was always to clean up messes. This time, the mess was you, and the cleanup required a full transfer of administrative control." The final nail landed when the general counsel, now clearly worried about his own liability, spoke to Victor Sterling with icy formality. "Mr. Sterling, the system shows that Ms. Sharma now controls 51.3% of the voting equity in the holding trust. That means legally she holds the controlling interest in Sterling Global." "Madam Chair," I said, cutting through Devon's pathetic rage, "I believe the first order of business for the new controlling shareholder is to address the severe organizational misconduct and gross negligence leading up to this event." Clang. The board chair, a pragmatic veteran of corporate wars, nodded once, acknowledging the new balance of power. She ignored Devon entirely. "What is your proposal, Ms. Sharma?" I stood up slowly. I hadn't raised my voice once. I hadn't begged or argued. I simply executed. I smoothed the lapel of my blazer and looked down at Devon, who was now being gently restrained by the CFO. The CEO, Victor Sterling, and the Chief Strategy Officer, Devon Pierce, are hereby placed on immediate indefinite administrative leave, pending a full forensic accounting of their asset management and strategic directives over the last 18 months. Their system access is to be revoked immediately. I paused, my eyes locking on the petrified legal counsel. "I want their termination papers, including a full non-disclosure and non-compete agreement, drafted and ready for my signature by 5 p.m. today. I think the severance package of 2 weeks' salary, the one they offered me, is sufficient, considering the circumstances." The sheer audacity of turning their own meager offer against them sent a ripple of shocked satisfaction through the room. "And finally," I concluded, picking up my pen and my empty briefcase, "I am stepping down as senior strategist. I will name a temporary CEO, someone who understands logistics over logos, and will remain on the board as executive chairwoman, remotely. I've secured my vindication and the company's future. The paperwork is finished. I'm leaving for good." I walked out of room 17B, my heels clicking sharply against the marble, louder than they ever had before. The young security guard saw me and didn't even attempt to look at his monitor. He just stood aside, eyes wide, respecting the newly anointed queen. I didn't stop for my car. I hailed a cab and directed it toward the nearest private airport. The sun outside felt warmer than it had that morning. I pulled out my phone and sent a final one-word text to the General Counsel's private number, the one he never used for work. Checkmate. I knew the meeting was still going. I knew the fallout would be immense. Press leaks, stock volatility, emergency board calls. But none of it mattered to me anymore. My role as the fixer was complete. I had taken the cost of loyalty, the 8 years of my life, the stress, the endless cleanup, and redeemed it, not just with money, but with the ultimate prize. Controlling interest in the company built by the very man who had tried to discard me. I had engineered the only systemic justice possible in that world, one where the fine print mattered more than the family name. Later that evening, sitting on a private jet high above the clouds, a flute of chilled champagne in my hand, I watched the distant lights of the city where Sterling Global was based. I was officially the owner of a troubled, multi-billion-dollar corporation, but I wasn't going back. I had set the course correction, installed a capable pilot, and secured my fortune. The only thing left was the permanent vacation I had earned, a quiet life built on the ruins of their ego. The paper trail had won, and the quiet one had the last, perfectly calculated word.